Good evening, everyone. So we'll wait for just a few more to join and then we'll start. All right. Good evening, everyone. So some of you may know me, but for those who don't, my name is Evangeline Pardesi, and I'm the current president of the UTTSP student chapter. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's technical talk. And seeing that it's our first talk, I'd like to take the time to wish you all a happy new year. So, carbon dioxide has a significant impact on global warming, partly because of its abundance in the atmosphere. As such, the carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS, is an important emissions reduction technology that can be applied across the energy system. So with this in mind, the UTTSB student chapter is pleased to host part 1 of our carbon capture, utilization, and storage series, facilitated by Dr. Dale Ramlakhan. So Dr. Dale Ramlakhan is an experienced engineering professional and thought leader with a demonstrated history of working in the utilities industry, skilled in asset management, strategic planning, reliability engineering and maintenance management, asset performance and health monitoring, renewable energy, and data integration. Dr. Ramlakhan graduated with a PhD degree in mechanical engineering in the area of renewable energy in 2011 and a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering with first-class honors in 2003 from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. He is a current chairman of the Energy Efficiency and Alternate Energy Committee, a subcommittee of the Council of the Energy Chamber, and a member of the Institute of Asset Management. So this evening, our talk will be a bit different. It will be in the style of an open discussion. So, Dr. Ramlakhan, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Evangeline. I know it's a Friday evening and difficult to have a technical talk on a Friday evening, especially on a topic as climate change, where we live in, I guess in Trinidad, where we don't see much drive or policy or direction towards doing it. But in the last, I could say probably in the last year or so, we've started to see an uptick in the understanding of climate change is important and important to Trinidad, although Trinidad only produces, if you look at it on an accumulated scale for CO2, is only 0.1% of the global emissions. But the um, two key performance indicators that come up, people always quote it, is the CO2 per capita, which a lot of us don't have direct impact over because the industry was built and then it's tagged to basically to you. And we are ranked second in the world when it comes to that, as well as CO2 emitted per GDP. I think we're also second in the world when it comes to that. So we are on top of the scale for things that are notorious when it comes to carbon dioxide. Uh, so Evangeline said we were going to try. So I'll just go through some how I wanted to do this talk. Initially, I want to, I guess, define what is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Look at what's happening globally, and then locally, we look at what is happening locally, what policies, what plans were in place between government, private sector for carbon capture and storage, and then we'll have a open discussion and questions that the participants have. So carbon capture and storage, what is it? It's a process where, again, it's self-explanatory. We capture carbon dioxide emissions from sources such as coal-fired power plants, ammonia plants, whatever, industrial facility that burns fossil fuels will produce carbon dioxide. So if you're producing carbon dioxide, the process for years and years this has been vented to the atmosphere to the point where it's at 417 ppm in the air, and that's the highest it has ever been, and it's continuing to climb. And we all know the effects of carbon dioxide causing acidification of oceans, melting of ice caps because of trapped heat. So you have a whole lot of climate issues happening because of carbon dioxide levels being that high in the atmosphere. So the key aspect of carbon capture is really the geological formation. So you would, in Trinidad context, you would have heard a lot about carbon capture for secondary oil recovery. So one way is of storing carbon dioxide is in geological formations such as oil and gas reservoirs, unminable coal seams, and deep saline reservoirs. And these are what I think, well, beside the coal, but the oil and gas reservoirs and deep saline reservoirs are what Trinidad is looking at. Other places all have, I guess, better geological formations, and you would see them talk about seawater caverns or underground caverns, salt caverns. You would see that a lot in like Utah, and in Europe you would see them looking at these formations to store carbon dioxide. So globally, what's taking place globally with carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and why has it become a hot topic? So based on the Paris Agreement, that was the 2015 Paris Agreement, each country made commitments, and their commitments are called the National Determined Contributions, or NDCs, to reduce CO2 emissions or reduce GHG emissions to try to get to that 1.5 or 2 degree mark. What has happened is that from all the analysis, it looks like, or it definitely is, that we're not going to make that target unless we do deep cuts with GHG emissions. And in order to get those deep cuts, two major, I guess, technologies started to come up, because the areas that needed decarbonization, I mean, a lot of focus was placed on the power sector to decarbonize that, and there's solutions for that. So you'd see renewables becoming parity with with traditional power generation because the cost has come down, the technology started to be proven, supply chain has improved. So because of that, you see the cost coming down, people get accustomed to installing it, financing it, confidence built into the sector. And so the prices at parity or even lower than traditional generation. So the power sector has been heavily, and the power sector does emit a large portion of the emissions globally. So the focus was there. But in order to get to that 1.5, focus had to be placed on industrial sector and transportation. So you would see two major technologies: hydrogen, which is a popular topic now because our local energy sector is looking to transition into low carbon hydrogen and green hydrogen, as well as carbon capture and storage, which means that we may not be able to remove fossil fuel from a process, but if we could trap the CO2, which is causing the issue, and put it somewhere else that's safe, or we could utilize it for some other process, that will also get us to the target of the 1.5. So that in a nutshell is the two pathways to what we call decarbonization of the industrial system, transport, or the industries that are difficult to transition to cleaner fuel. And so most of the development you would see happening and obviously in Europe, so, and the US. So right now, currently, there are projects, about 10 projects in the US and in England, 10. And there are a few other smaller projects, less than 2 in most of the other European countries. Most of these projects are in development, so they're none at scale. So I'm talking about large scale projects. So most of them are expected to come online between 2023, 2024, and some are a little beyond that. And you can look up some of them, HyNet Northwest, and you could see what they're doing and how they're progressing with this. Again, the ones that will obviously lead is the areas, the geological formations. So the place to store it is actually going to drive what the cost is going to be. And certain things come along with that. The safety aspect of making sure that CO2 cannot come back up. I mean, if people living around there, CO2 comes back up, it's going to have a big disaster there. Also, how the carbon, the flow of the stored carbon in the underground geological formation. So a lot of the effects of pressure changes, earthquakes on the CO2 that you're going to store. So a lot of study has to go into doing a carbon capture project. It's not just, okay, we have a formation, we pump CO2 in, and just monitor it. So it's a lot of study. So these projects take time. The next driving factor, well, as for carbon capture and storage, there's some other technologies that look at how to capture. So from coal-fired power plants, it's not only CO2 coming out. Coal has sulfur, so it creates sulfur dioxide and NOx, sometimes heavy metals. So cleaning up the CO2 or cleaning up the waste heat stream to streamline CO2, that technology has to be there as well. So that has lagged behind. A lot of it has been small scale, but to get it to large scale, that process has lagged behind. Now a lot of R&D money from those oil majors have driving carbon capture because they see their business requiring it to move forward, because no longer can they basically just give lip service to these processes. They need to actually put money in and really get behind their net zero, the targets that they set. Most of them have set net zero by 2050. So they've started to ramp up R&D on CCUS. So locally, what do we have locally? Locally, back in 2017, a project was launched called the CERM project, which is the CO2 emission reduction mobilization project. So way before way before, I guess, carbon capture became a necessity to get to the 1.5 Paris Agreement. Trinidad was looking at it, um, and there was, I guess, a project, a pilot project back in the day, moving CO2 from Point Lisas down south to oil fields and oil wells, oil reservoirs to get oil out. Most people know most of our onshore oil. You guys will know this better than me, seeing that you are petroleum engineers to be or in that sector. Um, the oil requires secondary extraction techniques because it's thicker oil, so it needs some injection of either steam or carbon dioxide. And our project was done, so we've had the experience of doing it, and so most of the focus was placed on that initially. But since the Paris Accord, that has expanded into looking at a wider scope and not just for secondary oil um, recovery. Not to be too controversial about this, I mean, there's schools of thoughts on this. Why would you want to use CO2, um, which is carbon dioxide or carbon based, to extract more carbon based fuel? So they have two sides to this, and a lot of debate as to if that is really the best use of the carbon dioxide to extract more carbon to emit more pollution. Um, so if you take the pure environmentalist approach, you may end up with that position. And so the point that why I raise it is because for this session, I want the discussion to be, it shouldn't just be, oh yes, CCUS is great and we want to do it and that kind of thing. There are questions that people have, and I want people to have discussion to be a balanced discussion. So we bring up all the possible pros and cons of doing it, and how best we can do it here in Trinidad. So that committee, that SIRMS committee, was joined with is a joint UTT UE Ministry of Planning. I think it's sponsored by BP and BHP as well. They created a committee to look at this. I think their last report was sometime last year. So they do, I guess, yearly updates so on where they reach. Um, they also presented at the recently concluded Energy Chambers Renewable Energy Conference. A lot of questions were asked of why is the progress so slow? A lot of their focus has been around getting the policies lined up. So I don't know how much people know about, there's a carbon reduction strategy for Trinidad of 2040. Vision 2030, the document also speaks about carbon reduction. So it starts from there, then it moves to our national determined contributions, our carbon reduction strategy. There's also a national climate policy, and a committee just recently set up sometime last year to start working on implementation plans for executing those policies. What we have in Trinidad is a lot of policies, but the action plan to get it done usually lags behind. And it's just the system we have. The technocrats need to form committees, and then these committees, they basically probably require technical assistance to get the information. And then they do consultations, and then they will, from that, they will determine what the plan would look like. And from there, they may then start looking at sending out RFPs to procure whatever they're looking at. So these processes take time. In this case, my view, some of these things need to be shortcutted, and because the longer you wait, there's more emissions and more difficult it gets to actually do these projects. So hold on, let me just. Right. So one bright spot that has occurred recently, and it came up as part of that conference because I didn't see it before. There's a company called Predator Oil and Gas Holdings. Again, you guys may know of them, and they did a pilot CO2 um, EOR project in Trinidad, actually in the Trinity region, Trinity Field, Innis Trinity Field, and they got some results, some very positive results, where they saw increase in production from injecting CO2. That pilot project was green lighted by the Ministry of Energy, and that's so based on their preliminary preliminary work that they did on the pilot project, they believe that Trinity in its Trinity field, can be developed using CO2 for secondary extraction. So they've planned to expand this pilot project and then move into trying to make it commercially viable on a larger scale, using actual CO2 from industry. Right now, I think they utilize CO2 from a industrial gas provider for their tests. So there's work happening in Trinidad for looking at it and really trying to progress it, but it's in little bits and pieces now. So but there's a drive to, I guess, for the first time in a long time, a lot of almost all the technocrats are lined up behind really pushing the climate change agenda and coming up with, I guess, policy positions which everyone is on board with to actually decarbonize the sector. Even and for update from the private sector side, most of the private sector companies are also, most of them, as you know, are foreign shareholders, foreign owned, have set targets for reduction in emissions. And so they have their programs. So you'll see the BPs and Shells with their programs talking about their net zero, but also the downstream companies such as Proma and Yara. All of them are looking at how to improve their efficiency as well as get their product greener. And that demand is coming from the shareholders, the people who put money in, as well as the people who they sell their product to. These people are requesting that their product become environmentally friendly and that it meets our target, so that the earth could continue and the next generation could benefit from the planet and not be in a climate crisis where we have extreme weather events, more extreme weather events than we currently have, and famine and those kind of things. So there's a lot of push now for carbon reduction. What we lack, I guess, is coordination and timely implementation. And I guess this is not specific to this spheres. This is common, I guess, across a lot of what happens in Trinidad. So I think, Evangeline, I talked for like 20 minutes there. I want to get feedback from the participants, and I want you to open the floor to them to see.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Seeing questions in the chat. So
I am seeing questions in the chat. Okay, so I want to know if there's an option to use a component of fluid that is. That's a very, I have to research that last question from the student chapter in Colombia. I don't know, it's maybe possible. I've heard about negative carbon emissions, but it usually comes from bio stuff, biofuels, bio productions, and not necessarily. If you do, I guess if you do nuclear and you capture any other, you could probably get it to negative. But I'm not. It's an interesting point. I'll have to research that. All right. So the question by Adrian is, which carbon capture process is most costly, and the whole carbon system feasible for Trinidad? I would say the one is the transportation of that carbon dioxide. We have, I guess, a lot of highly purified carbon dioxide coming from the ammonia sector. But moving it from where it's produced to where it's needed, especially if we say we're looking at um, for oil recovery, that involves pipelines going down either down the coast or going on land. I think the previous pipeline was defunct, and then people, because our developments, housing developments, um, or planning of land use is kind of ad hoc, you would end up with having to acquire a lot of land. So I guess the transportation aspect for Trinidad would be the highest cost. Getting it to getting it to the next point, because my view, if we're gonna do that, we're gonna really go not will be capture and utilization for secondary oil storage. So that I know the Ministry of Energy did work on that and was looking into it, and the major stumbling block was moving that carbon dioxide via pipes to where it's needed, and I think that will still be so.
I have a question. You mentioned that earlier. You mentioned that we are one of the highest in terms of per capita emissions
Mhm.
of CO2, right? And you mentioned the Predator project in the um, southern part of Trinidad down there. You know of any other projects with carbon capture that taking place in Trinidad, or any companies that looking into carbon capture or anything like that?
No,
Or
so and this came up at that conference a couple of weeks ago. The question was a similar question that you asked, and people were saying that there's no projects, and then somebody posted, no, there's this project, the Predator project. So from what I gathered, this is probably the only project that exists in Trinidad right now looking at carbon capture and utilization.
okay.
But so speaking to like the other major, like I know BP has that as part of their plan. A lot of people have it as a plan, something they want to do, but how to get it done, or costing out the scenarios. Nobody has reached that phase as yet as to say, okay, we have a project, we have beside the Predator project, that is, we want to take CO2 from say Yara, and we want to bury it somewhere in the central range where we have an underground saline reservoir that we could put it there. Nobody has looked at anything like that. I suspect the university has started looking at, and that was the update from the SIMS team. They've started to, and the minister spoke about it as well at length in his address at the conference, where they've started to put teams in the Ministry of Energy to look at the possible storage sites, the underground reservoirs. So they've kind of ramped up their efforts to see if they can make this work in Trinidad, and that definitely will help. Once you start finding the sites, um, that will start making the whole process. Yeah, Cassandra, there's a project, but I say it may be a small scale project. This project with Predator is actual on field project. I don't know if they're doing an on field project, but this one actually is on the Trinity and the Trinity fields, and they actually extracted. They show how much oil was coming up before and how much they increased production by using CO2. Um, So I could what Evangeline,
So,
what I'll do, I'll send you that link to that.
okay.
They have a website release. Probably I could post it here. Hold on, I post it in the chat so people could see it
Mhm.
and read it because they made a public they made a public release of what they found. You guys again would be more. I'm sure Cassandra will be more adept at understanding the jargon and that than me. I could only paraphrase it. She would understand. I guess she would understand that a whole lot better than me.
And so earlier you mentioned hydrogen, right?
Yeah.
So
I
hydrogen
didn't want to
versus
turn your talk. I didn't want
carbon
to turn your
capture.
talk into hydrogen because focus has been a lot on hydrogen. So but I didn't want to turn. I just mentioned it, but I was trying to stick to your topic.
Well, the feasible, which one you think would be more feasible for Trinidad? Hydrogen versus CCUS?
uh, Unbiased opinion will still be hydrogen, and the reason why right now the project that's out there, the cost of hydrogen really is predicated on the cost of power. So the lower you could get cost of power, the lower the cost of hydrogen per kilogram or per ton you could get. The drive globally is to get hydrogen to $2 a kilogram or $2,000 a ton. That if you're between 1,500 or $1.50 and $2, you're basically on par with SMR, which is steam methane reforming, which is what all of those plants use on their front end to produce. Basically, people, I guess, I don't know how much people know, but the petrochem sector takes that natural gas that you guys take off the ground and basically strip the hydrogen out of it. And that's why the carbon mixes with oxygen and it forms CO2. The methanol is slightly different. They bring back some CO2 to get the C in because it has a C in methanol. But basically, they split that methane molecule to get hydrogen. What the hydrogen or green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen we're talking about is making hydrogen from electrolysis, which I guess we did in secondary school where we split water and you get hydrogen and oxygen as a byproduct. But that process, as you know, requires a lot of energy, so it's very energy intensive. So the cost of power is what dictates how um, how effective or how commercially viable that project is going to be. To make it green, people are going to use renewables, and renewables prices have been coming down. 4 cents doesn't get you to the $2 per kilogram, and needs to get us a little bit lower, probably to 3. But the benefit that we have here, and that's why this project is started to look viable. The power price in Trinidad, as we all know, is low, one, but they want to utilize what we have. Our system is set up where we install a lot of simple cycle, open cycle gas turbines, which flare a lot of their waste heat, all the waste heat into the atmosphere. So the idea was to take that waste heat without increasing gas usage to produce more power, and that power would be cheap power under what we'll see globally, the 4 or 5 cents per you'll get for renewables, and that once it's classified as no extra gas is going to go into it, it's basically carbon neutral, and that's the advantage Trinidad has with that project, because the power prices could be low enough to get it close to parity with the current SMR process of producing hydrogen. And that's why I've seen a lot of interest in it. And you would see a lot of even NGC sign a MOU, big global equity firm has signed on to look at the project. And there's a lot of buzz on it because it could be a world leading project. It could lead it will be the first large scale hydrogen project in the world, if it comes off any time frame that they have specified. So that's why it might be because of the inefficiencies in our system, we have the ability to make something to push the energy transition with hydrogen, and that's why I would say it will lead CCUS, but everyone I guess all the experts globally have shown hydrogen alone can't solve the problem. We also need to do carbon capture and storage because there's some industries that just cannot remove their fossil fuel from the input side. They're going to have to capture capture it from the output side, from the waste side. And I've seen somebody ask, what is it? Be a pie, can work with hydrocarbons and why? Okay, I think it's going to turn into hydrogen talk, you know. This hydrogen, by 20, most places have it by 2030. It would be on par with hydrocarbons globally. I think it will happen before that because the drive for it will drive the electrolyzer cost down. The major factor beside the power price, electrolyzer costs is pretty high right now. These electrolyzers have been used from a long time. They were used to make chlorine and those kind of things, but now they're changing them over to make hydrogen. And the size of the stacks are still small scale. They still have like 1 megawatt, 5 megawatts, but going to the future, if you want to, ammonia plant requires 2,000 megawatts of electrolyzer. The size of the plants we have here, so it requires huge scale, and that work has started by all the major manufacturers: NEL, ThyssenKrupp, Siemens. All of them have started, ITM. All of them have started to put a lot of R&D in scaling up their processes. So once you start to see that happening, just like with renewables, you would see the cost coming down. So between 2025 and 2030 would be my answer. I think most energy companies in the hydrocarbon field have embraced hydrogen in some way, as well as CCUS as part of their energy transition. Some people looking at blue hydrogen, which is when you do carbon capture and storage. You could create blue hydrogen. Green is when it comes straight from renewables, but there's gray, which is the normal process, and then what Trinidad is trying to push is something called white hydrogen, which comes from energy efficiency. So there are many different colors, I guess, or some in between. People have proposed different things, but yeah, that's when I think it would become viable. I don't know if there are any other questions.
Okay, just jumping back on the carbon capture train, right? So
Please
if
do.
you could if you could shed some light on carbon trading and carbon credit.
Right. So Chamber was working on that, and that also we also had that as part of our conference, where more and more voluntary. The issue with carbon trading globally, there's an article in the Paris Accord called Article 6, and Article 6 allows for trading between I guess voluntary markets, setting up markets and trading. Right now, what is happening that wasn't ratified at the last meeting, and then because of COVID was skipped. So I guess it will happen in the next meeting. So that has kind of slowed down progress. Where if you're looking to create a market, you will have this use with how you're creating a market and commercially trading emissions. But that didn't stop you from finding a bilateral partner to trade, but it will have to be a government-to-government relationship. So the government will have to approve it on both sides, and they could get the trade done. There are some established markets, the California market, there's one in Mexico, Montreal, and Europe has probably the one that most people look at. I think the European prices for carbon actually start at the top $35 a ton. And they have set in their policy that will go up every year. So they're driving the change, and that's why I see a lot of activity with all the decarbonization aspects happening in Europe, because companies have to pay this tax if they can't reduce their carbon, and that is ratcheted up every year. So they have to continue doing something. So at the chamber, we were initially looking to set up a market or join a market. But again, our size of our emissions was, I guess, too small to be a trading block. So we again, in next phase was try to get regionally if we could line up to create like a Caribbean carbon market, and then probably link that to Montreal or California. But again, the issue with doing that, you have to have projects. So you need something to generate credits. The idea that we were pushing forward was we wanted to generate credits to be able to sell to improve um, project financing and bringing in foreign direct investment. We didn't want it the other way around, where we linked our market and people now buy offsets and not make the changes necessary. Because we have, I guess, a double edge issue where we have depleted gas supplies and we really need to push efficiency and really move away as much as we can move away from fossil generation or fossil fuels, but still keep the energy sector alive and sustainable. So from this conference we saw a lot more I guess a lot more markets popping up in Latin America. So there will be a lot more options for Trinidad to be able to link to Latin America, a Latin American market. Most of these are voluntary because as well Latin America has been driving renewables really quickly and moving their power systems and the industries to renewable generation. I know we usually look north or we usually look towards Europe, but if we look to South America, you would see that there are possibly some options for us to join a market or and have emissions trading. The Ministry of Planning has been also working with the chamber to kind of come up with a position. And what has come out of that is that the UNFCCC will be doing, I guess, a capacity building with the Ministry of Planning. And I guess they'll have some key stakeholders where they would now look at to see what's the best option for Trinidad and Tobago. Will it be a carbon tax? Will it be emission trading scheme? So they're going to do that quite sometime this year. So we're getting closer to what that would be for Trinidad. With carbon trading, who do you think would be TNT's major competitors or allies? Well, I don't see it be a competitor. Oh, allies would be you really need to have a link to our market and have enough volumes to trade or generate enough credits. So initially, I raised this with the GIZ, which is the German entity that does work in the region, and their view was, why don't Trinidad look at creating an internal carbon market instead of looking to try to link externally? Because they thought it was going to be difficult to link externally, where you have the sectors that generate the projects may not be necessarily the sectors willing to finance the projects, but you may have other companies willing to put money in, finance it, and then trade the offsets for it so that their processes could be tagged as being tagged with the reduction. We raised it as a group and as well with the Ministry of Planning. So I think all the UNFCCC, all that will cover what will best work for Trinidad and Tobago. I see you post a question, Evangeline. So I did just I saw deep ocean storage for hydrogen. And my belief is if deep ocean storage for hydrogen, because there's a project or there's research being done in the North Sea for storage of hydrogen, and they were saying they had like 35 peta-hours that they could store of hydrogen. And so my view is if they could store hydrogen, I can't see why they can't store CO2. Hydrogen lighter than that, and if they could store it there, I definitely think they could store it. The environmental impacts would be, I guess, if you have leakages in there, it will definitely cause acidification of the oceans and that kind of thing. But I've not seen anybody talk about putting it in oceans though. Putting CO2, but hydrogen, I saw them talking about putting hydrogen in ocean.
Okay. Does anyone have any more questions?
It's another question in the chat. I was gonna ask it, but I saw somebody typed it already. From Peterson, if there are any legislative inputs to help accelerate the CCUS efforts.
Yeah, so it
Yeah.
is already there's already a policy. There's already a policy. I mean, it starts with that whole vision 2030 for clean environment for everybody, and then that filters down into what the NDCs are, which was signed off by the government. So it's basically a policy. The issue we have is, so it's not really legislative input, is what transitioning a policy into implementation plan and how. So with the NDCs come projects, but some of these projects are, I guess, what technocrats think could work. And in order to get implementable projects, you have to get the companies or the private sector to be involved in that, as well as people who might be willing to finance these projects. So it's not so simple, and that's why you'll see developers might be able to develop a project based around a concept. When the government tries to do that, it's a little bit difficult unless the only thing you could do it, I mean, is by taxation. So if you want to say if there's legislative inputs to help accelerate it, yes. The answer would be yes, but that would be a tax. And do you want to tax? The question always arises: do you want to tax an industry that is already taxed and is already struggling based on low commodity prices? Do you want to further exacerbate the situation? And it's because the market conditions change and we don't really drive that demand for the commodity. And so we don't have control over the prices. But in other places, I think more and more people are realizing that you wouldn't get any movement unless you do something like that. And you would see it, the evidence show in Europe, and I think a lot of Latin American countries also looking at carbon taxes, and that kind of drives change. And so if you want to look at it that way, yes, probably if we want to get really serious to accelerate it, we signal our intention to have a carbon tax. We could start off low and then ratchet it up over time. It may cause some disruption in the energy sector, but it could make the effort, make the push for energy efficiency and carbon capture happen. See somebody else. Right, I see Peterson was asking me. Oh, what did yes, it leads into it. So the sectors, the energy sector is really in terms of being policed, the legislation and the Ministry of Energy kind of does a pretty good job in making sure that the sector does what it's supposed to do, and so there's reporting and verification processes. I think I see Cassandra is still on this call, so Cassandra used to be part of that kind of whole verification, at least on the integrity side. But there's divisions in there that look at what is expected and what is projected and what's the actual outputs. So it can be enforced if you decide to implement it. The issue is to get, again, going back to this, the issue is what is going to trigger these companies to reduce their emissions. You want to legislate and say, okay, we expect your emissions to drop. Are you going to by X amount over so much time? And that was attempted. I was part of that committee. There was an energy efficiency and alternative energy committee started by the Ministry of Public Utilities, and we kind of set what the baseline was and what we expect each sector. We didn't go company by company, but each sector to achieve in terms of targets. But we didn't go as far as saying how to do it. And when we asked for the data from these companies, I mean, they were kind of hesitant because the first question they asked was, "Are you going to put in that policy document a carbon tax?" And that can get them a little bit jumpy. They didn't want to be seen as supporting a carbon tax. And at this stage, they didn't want to be seen as supporting that. But I think it just needs momentum. More and more people. This process has only reached so far because more and more people have started to ask and keep pushing for the energy transition and becoming more sustainable. So I think a lot of education has to continue to happen, and this has to reach all spheres of Trinidad and Tobago, starting with primary schools, primary school children, everywhere that understand why we talking about these things, why we want to transition, why we want to move away from fossil-based a fossil-based economy.
Dale, I could add something. I don't know if you can hear me properly.
Yes, Cass.
But I think in Trinidad, it has a lot to do with the government because here in Brazil, we have AMP, which is the National Agency of Petroleum, Natural Gas, and Biofuels, and they regulate everything. So offshore in Brazil is mainly deep water. So when you bring the oil or gas onto the FPSO, you immediately separate the CO2 and you re-inject the CO2 into the reservoir. You can put this into your producing reservoir in order to increase oil recovery or into a depleted reservoir for storage. And all of this is monitored by AMP, which is the Brazilian regulation here in Brazil, and they set all these standards. So in terms of Trinidad, I think that is something we need to work on, is improving our regulatory system with respect to that as well.
Yeah, so I agree with you totally. And the question is, I think the old legacy system bogs us down. And this is how we used to do it, and looking for new ways to do things. That change you see in as I say, in the public sector or the technocrats, or how we set up, how we were initially set up to do business. That change is very, very slow. You wouldn't see, you don't get a kind of radical change to say, okay, we're going to try something new to do that. That is a downfall. You're correct. I mean, if you're serious about it from the government level, you would make those changes to get that.
I think the government needs to force sanctions or payments, penalties when they don't abide. And in Trinidad, we don't, because it's this one friend and that one friend. Whereas in South America, they take these things very serious. Even with flaring, that is monitored. And once you cross the amount you're supposed to flare, even with drilling operations and completions, you're only allowed to flare a certain amount.
And you know how much years Trinidad trying to get flaring under control and still has not been able to.
Right. So once you cross that, AMP is alerted here, and you have to pay the fine or they shut down your platform.
Okay, you see, and you're right. I guess the oil companies had, I guess, the lobbying powers. I would say the lobbying powers have more influence than on the government than the environmental aspects. So I think some of that's starting to change, and the rhetoric now from the government, or at least the ministers, are now starting to talk more about carbon, more about this sustainable energy. I mean, before they would never talk about it. Now they're actually accepting that it's something to happen. I mean, they still believe in the legacy system, but hopefully, I mean, it's slower than you would see, I guess, in Brazil or even in Europe, anywhere else. But I think the momentum is there. Once I guess more people keep pressing, I think you'll get that change. I want to answer this question on the solar power coming down, and if it will play, I don't know if the question was geared towards Trinidad, but that there's a major solar project that will be built in Trinidad within, I guess, the next year. By middle of 2022, it should be online. So construction would start sometime in the middle of 2021, and it's going to be for 112 megawatts, 92 megawatts at Veteran Castle and 20 megawatts in Trinity area. And that project is only going to be built because the cost is significantly lower than what we'd see in the Caribbean region for a project closing. It's actually on par or less than what your current electricity rate is. So the project, that's why the project has been green-lighted to move forward. And if that is our opening position for power generation from solar, I expect future projects with the understanding of how to build a project, all the benefits from doing one and building the capacity, you would end up with it now going either being on par or lower going forward. What the limitation has started to pop up, I guess, on the government side, and the Cass's point from before, we always get a pushback when things started. The economics work, but now they've started to raise the issue of land use. Some of these land spaces have not been utilized to do anything for many years, decades in some cases, but yet when we say we want to use it for solar, it's coming up as a no, it's agricultural land or whatever it is. But a lot of information out there, and a lot of, even this developer who's going to do this project has started to show that they build these projects with dual purpose. So the projects are built for, they utilize it for sheep farming, agriculture could still happen on the spaces, and even you see even wind turbines onshore, they were saying that they're taking up the government position as it takes up a lot of land space, but most of the wind farms, if you look at in Europe or even in the US, are on farms, on people farm on the land. It takes up a certain footprint, but the rest of land is still available to do another activity. So I think they're on board with the solar. So you'd see a lot of the rhetoric now pushing to offshore wind. But offshore wind, in my view, is still about a decade away when it comes to power generation. Globally, it's probably about a decade away. So that may be, if we decide to get into that, it's going to be a while, unless a lot of government makes concessions or does some of the groundwork where they do wind studies offshore, and they allocate acreage for wind production offshore, make interconnection available, and they will have to do a lot of prep work, which will cost a lot of money to just get that off the ground. It will obviously be more expensive than what we are accustomed to now. So in my view, that's at least 10 years away.
Okay. Does anyone have any final questions before we close off for today?
Yeah, one question from me again. Do you know if the carbon, the CO2 being emitted could be possibly transformed in a solid form? Because I know carbon have like
yeah, so there's some people working on that actually. There's some people actually working on that, and that's been my question, but it's a black box right now. So from the power sector, there are people who say they can make it into a solid form, into solid pellets, and then they can utilize it. But again, it's still a lot. These processes are patented, and the research is really like, I guess, new, not out to market yet. But you'll see people putting out research papers or companies, startups that have said they can do it. And what they have done when they started to do that, they are basically trying to attract funding to ramp it up. And I saw Exxon put money into a startup with a Japanese company that happens to own the shares in the company I work at, Marubeni. They put money into a carbon capture company that's trying to basically do exactly what you say, turn it into a solid form. So it is possible. I mean, I think all options are being explored at this point in time. Any way to get CO2 out of the atmosphere, you would see that it's happening, but scale and speed that it needs to happen, we are not reached there yet.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we sign off, I just want to share my screen and present you with this certificates of appreciation. So on behalf of the UTTSB student chapter, we wish to thank you for taking the time to facilitate this discussion and enlightening us on CCUS. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I didn't realize it was your first talk. Also, next time I'm back, I don't know if people prefer the PowerPoint presentations. I mean, it's really old fashioned, but I know some people like seeing slides. But so I'm open to coming back to any future events that you would want to have me back for, Evangeline.
Yes, for sure.
My goal is to try to get the message out. I've been doing more and more of these talks with different groups who a lot of, I guess, younger people started podcasts. Climate conscious. There's Beyond the Rig. There's quite a few that started trying to get the message out. The chamber itself does its stuff, but our work is really targeted towards the member. We done a poor job targeting the normal people. I mean, we target energy professionals, so we good at getting the message across, and I guess our jargon fits that. It doesn't really fit the rest. It usually goes over most people, most people's head. But we're working to try to break the message up into smaller pieces that people could digest. I think the one area we're looking at going forward is really the electricity subsidy and if it's bringing value. It's something that we've been working on for a long time and presenting for a long time. But again, re-highlighting it because of the issue with natural gas and the shortage of natural gas coming into the petrochem sector. So again, I want to thank you all for listening to me, to my talk. Again, I'm open to anything else you have in the future.
Yes, definitely. We'll keep in touch. So thanks everyone for joining and have a great night.
Thanks, guys.